Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Bald Explorer live stream. I'm Richard Vobes, and we had a crash, but all I did was refresh the page, and it seems to have revived the stream. I haven't had to sort of ditch it and start again, so hopefully, fingers crossed, everything's all working. I don't know why it does that. It's just some days it just goes meh. Think it's got poet syndrome. Yes, it's got something. Good afternoon to Linda Kane, Jeff Kellison, Adrian from TurboStream, Ben Reeve, John Willoughby, and the lovely Julia. Hey, nice to see you all. I seem to be getting two versions now of the chat. I only need one version, so let me just sort that out over here. Hope you're all well. It's a Friday, which is great news. Apparently it's going to rain tomorrow. I've got a walk planned, but I probably won't do it because it's going to rain. And it's a nice walk with good scenery. I don't often mind if it rains. I could go and do a walk in the rain. Just a sort of gentle walk somewhere. Might do that, might not. Somebody's asked me to recommend some books. And I've got a couple of books on my shelf that I could recommend. So I could do a video about that, although it will be an indoor video. I always feel guilty if I do an indoor video, although my stories seem to be going down all right. Book arrived today. I've got a couple of books on order by an author called Marion Shord. Don't know how you pronounce her name. This one published in 1980, so it's a bit out of date, but it's interesting. The Theft of the Countryside, and it's as a piece of history. It's interesting in terms of the countryside because farmers. She's put the guilt at the edge of the farmers, of the farming industry. And she says in this book, the unique character of the English countryside is being destroyed by far-reaching agricultural revolution. The traditional patchwork of field, down, hedge, wood and stream, which has delighted the world, is in the early stages of a process of transformation. And if it continues unhindered, rural England will become a featureless expanse of prairie and grass monoculture. Our landscape will become to look more like that of the American Midwest or Soviet Central Asia. And I think we did go through that period until about the mid-90s, and then there was a bit of we, as I understand it and what I've been reading, is hedgerows we got rid of. Big machines came in that were huge, and they wanted more space, and hedgerows became obstructions. And so we started to dig them all up in quite large numbers. But I think that stopped, and I think there is a bit of a resurgence to put back hedgerows. Of course, you can't put back ancient trees and ancient hedgerows once they've been dealt with. And they're still cutting hedges with flailing. And I noticed that on the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, they've got a page of advice for farmers to look after birds, and they advise flailing. This is the machine that goes along, just sort of trims and chops them. So if you've got a little sapling growing in there of a new hedgerow tree, say goodbye to it, because this thing is just going to just uniformly chop it. It's not being properly laid as the old hedgerows were done, which is a shame. There are people that are doing some of that work, and the conservation people are slowly doing it, but not enough. Not enough, because our wild species are disappearing rather rapidly. I'm talking, and you're listening. Cuppa and a couple of biscuits, says Linda Kane. Tommy Shelby, do a separate video. I will be doing a separate video on my books, some books to recommend. Somebody's asked them about the South Downs, so I've got some books to talk about that. Turbo Stream says it's my birthday today and I had to go for a blood test. Well, happy birthday, first of all. Looking very sprightly youthful at 22 now. And I hope the blood came out red or blue, of course. If it comes out blue, I think you get on your birthday your own palace. So do invite the Vobes over to your own palace if you get one. Lots of happy birthdays going on for you today. I suppose that's set the conversation now in the chat room. However, we are reading the story of a Norfolk harm. The story of a Norfolk farm is what we're actually reading. I was just looking to see when this was published. This was published in the 40s, as I recall, on bank paper. Author's note, 1940. And we will continue to read this laugh-a-minute book at things that go wrong for this author. Thank you very much for coming to listen. We're on part 3. This is chapter 25, the first furrow. So we've spent, I don't know how long we've been doing this, but we've spent a number of weeks of him just trying to purchase the farm and do it up so that he can actually start farming once his old tenant left. So it looks like, and I think they've harvested some old crops that were there, but he hasn't dug anything or started his own farming. So I think that's it. Please forgive any noises that you hear that you might think have come from my rear, but actually they are materializing from the leather-like chair that is in the studio every time I move my body on it. I'm on a sund under a tree with a delightful breeze, says Audrey. How lovely. It's nice that you're on a sund or a sund, whatever that is, or a sunned. Sunned? Who knows? I turned away from the failure of my scheme and regarded the new tractor. It was as beautiful as the cottages were sordid. The cottages were a manifestation of greed, confusion, sloth, and stupidity. The tractor was a work of genius. It was the result of many years experimenting by a Belfast engineer named Harry Ferguson. The Ferguson tractor was not a great lumbering old-fashioned thing which drew a contraption of heavy iron framing of plough breasts and shares, an iron monster that would press down the land with its weight and dig itself into the hillside. It was half the weight of an ordinary tractor, built of aluminium and of immensely strong steel, and it carried its twin furrow plough under its tail on 3 steel arms that looked like a grasshopper's hind legs. On pulling a lever like the short gear change lever of a racing car, the twin ploughs lifted up out of the ground. Instead of lugging a heavy sledge of ploughs around a field, bibbling, as Bob said, at the corners, this new design of tractor lifted its tail and, put in reverse, moved back exactly to where one wanted to drop the implements. It had a petrol engine, which looked absurdly small, but the engine would be in use 2 or 3 seasons after an ordinary paraffin-fired engine was scrapped. Both Bob and Jimmy were sceptical of its performance. You won't beat horses on that old sod of Illy Pierce. No tractor can get up there. So as soon as it was run on planks off the lorry, I took it to Hilly Pierce. Years ago, 20 years ago to be exact, taking it back to 1918, the land, so this is 1938 then, thank you, the land was properly farmed. This field was then ploughed by teams of, I always want to say buttocks, but it's bullocks. But I always look at the word and go buttocks. But it's not buttocks. It's not ploughed by a team of buttocks. It's bullocks. not the other word. After the war, there was a gradual decline. What? After the war, there was a gradual. They put war there. There's an S. There was a gradual decline in farming, corresponding to a slow disintegration of the simple human virtues in those countries which were victorious. Hilly Pierce used to grow 15, 16 sacks of barley an acre, and in the harvest of 1937 it grew less than 5. The field in August was silvery grey with thistles hiding the small thin stalks bearing mouse-ear barley. It was twilight when I got into the field. I took the tractor to the bottom of the steepest part. The engine purred almost silently. I pushed down the lever controlling the hydraulic gear, which dropped the twin ploughs. I put it in ploughing gear, let in the clutch, and opened the throttle. The thistle giant of Goliath had possession of Hilly Pierce. Was this small grey machine its David? The little machine went up without the least falter. Its thin, spiky wheels pressed the ground lighter than horses' hooves would have done. Its twin shares bit into the sullen soil and turned it over, exposing a triangle of white roots. I heard Bob mutter, "Blast, I like that patent," as he stared at it. This was the highest praise from one who regarded many of my schemes with hard-eyed caution. I was beginning to realise, with the early Victorian author The Chronicles of Clay Farm, that the hardest part of farming lay in the stubbornness of human ideas. 2 days later, after riding the grey tractor, and Bob leading Blossom and Gilbert hitched to the old single furrow plough, we went up to 14 acres. Our 150 tons of mangolds were in their pie by the haystacks, covered against frost by some of the straw threshed out on foxed covert. I was eager to start ploughing before the frost spoiled the mango tops, which, turned in while yet green, would be good manure. Bob gave me my first lesson in setting out a field for ploughing. First, he and I paced out the field, setting sticks where the single furrow plough was to set in. Then he drove his plough across the field. I followed on the Ferguson tractor, steering in the furrow, and feeling an immense satisfaction when I looked over my shoulder to watch the swede and mangold tops being turned under into 2 furrows, and the new earth lying on top. At last I was ploughing my own land. The day was cold and clear. Far away, through a gap in the trees bordering the castle hills, I saw the North Sea, white and harried by the polar wind, which, to me, was exhilarating. The tops and leaves of the mangolds were as good as a coat of muck for the land. They would rot under the furrow I was ploughing, and feed the barley that would be sown here later on. With considerable interest and pleasure, I watched green heavy clusters of leaves disappearing under the brown corkscrewing of the earth behind me. I reflected that 10 years ago, writing of such a scheme, my inclination would have been to describe a pair of great horses plodding before poor old Hodge, the swingle trees swaying as the traces or chains tautened, the wave of the earth rearing up and turning over, the soft shear of the share, and the bright breast of the plough gleaming like a curved silver sunflower petal. Behind, white gulls would weave and fall, uttering cries of the wild seashore, and all day Hodge, an old sack over his shoulders against driving rain, in broken boots, a bit of bread and cheese, his only dinner, toiling there against the elements. And 20 years ago I would have scorned to mention even an iron horse-plough, My Hodge, by the way of Hardy and Jeffreys, would have driven a plough of wood, apple-tree wood. As for writing about the tractor, that snorting, fume-making, craft-killing ugliness, I would have scorned such things of civilized decadence. I would have conveniently forgotten my racing motorcycle in this connection. Now, for the truthful picture. The ploughman's shoulders were protected by a leather flying coat with a collar. There was a sack, and it was covered it covered the iron seat of the machine that I was steering. No, that isn't quite true. The machine was steering itself. I merely sat on the sack-covered iron seat and was carried across the field by power of 20 synthetic horses. My feet and legs were inside rubber boots, warmed by the torpedo-like body of the tractor. My hands were warm in thick leather gloves of horsehide, brought at Wanamaker's stores in New York 8 years before, and still in good condition after constant use. To start the first furrow of our new venture, the steward had worn his new buskins with 6 overcoats. Even so clad, the polar wind was so cold that his face, as he walked behind the horse steering the plough, was blue and shrunken. I was well wrapped, wearing a pair of poplin pyjama trousers under my flannel trousers, and over them a pair of blue dungaree overalls. These 3 layers kept the warm air around my legs. The job seemed easy. All I had to do was let the tractor steer itself up the straight trough whence the previous furrow had been turned to the other end of the field. Then I pulled a lever, and the twin ploughs, controlled by automatic pumps, were lifted by 3 steel arms out of the earth. My tail up, as it were, I steered along the headland to the next marked furrow, and, pushing the lever forward, began to plough down another marked-out stretch. The field being marked out, I was left alone, as the horses had to go for straw, to litter the yards for the bullocks, not buttocks, for the bullocks, which would soon be coming to eat the hay and roots and make the muck. I felt a warmth of satisfaction coming over me. I was a ploughman, and I had found freedom. There was no mud in the yards now. Our new concrete slabs covering the drains were lovely to walk on. I found myself singing as the wind blew hard. I was doing one of the finest, the most useful, most natural, and the least rewarded job on earth. Halfway down my furrow, I heard, above the subdued roar of the engine, a noise like an ungreased axle. It became a jingle, and then a jangle. Looking round, I found myself staring into the eyes of a white bird less than a yard from my face. Behind its spread whiteness, other birds were dipping and cutting, interweaving, lightening the earth with upheld wings, scrabbling, pecking, flapping, jostling about my dark brown furrows. My first gulls! They were black-headed gulls in winter dress. Their wings were pearl and white. Their reddish-brown feet were thrust forward as air brakes while alighting. So many worms and grubs were being turned up that soon the foremost birds were sated. They dropped out of the scramble and soon stood in the furrow, becoming smaller and smaller as I went down the field. As I came up again, their competitive or greedy feelings overcame their fullness, and one by one, after hesitation and false starts, jumped off the furrow and flew upwind and cut down into the screaming throng again. I soon got used to them. There were more than 1,000. Myself and machine seemed to be releasing from the earth a whirl of silver-white life, which uttered metallic cries, parts of which all the time were losing animation, becoming drops and beads of cold soldier on the earth. Bob said to me, "If you have a tractor, you'll scare away the pheasants." In Norfolk, with its light soil and light rainfall, pheasants are numerous. Light land and light rainfall mean that chicks' feet in spring do not get clogged, so they survive, where on heavy land in the wet spring they would perish. I saw more pheasants while ploughing that afternoon than I had seen walking by the hedges and through the woods all the past summer. One cockbird was so indifferent to me and my tractor that he spread his wings, bowing and generally showing off to the 3 dead leaf moth hens within 5 yards of us. He chased one, then another, quite impartially. Pigeons, too, usually so shy and careful, so keen-sighted, flew down to feed on the tops of the adjacent rows of swedes, quite heedless of the noise. Rooks came too to hammer at those swedes with jackdaws and grey hoodie crows. But when I turned to take their photographs with the camera, what a change! The cock pheasant ran away as fast as he could. The hens merged themselves to invisibility in the central furrows. Pigeon, rook, crow, gull all departed. A few minutes later, they were back again. After ploughing about 3 acres, or 6 hours, in excluding half an hour for lunch under the hedge, I began to resent the noise of the engine. It was colder than I thought. The field was less brown, the trees less distinct. The sea, through the pines, was growing dim. Light and darkness were equal. I began to feel a rising tremor of excitement within me. The children would now be halfway from London, somewhere beyond Cambridge. They had caught the 9 o'clock from Devon, mother and the 5 children. The 2 smallest ones would be tired. I found the inward tremor change to panic. I must hurry. In less than half an hour they'd be arriving at Welk station. What would I say to them, expecting to enter a fine new farmhouse home? I had turned the men off. The cottages were made. Hang on. What would I say to them, expecting to enter a fine new farmhouse home? I had turned the men off. The cottages were made, except for bits of plastering inside the doors, painting and colouring the walls. But they looked too bare and bleak. The granary was more homelike, draughty and dark as it was. Putting the tractor into top gear, and with twin gleaming ploughs in air, I went down fast to the hedge, picked up my dinner bag, slung it over my shoulder, through the new creosoted gate and down the hill and the half-finished gully road to the car shed. Just going to share this picture, which says, this is a photograph is included in the book, my first furrows on 14 acres, January 1938, pheasants, daws, rooks, pigeons and plover walked quite near until they saw the camera. And this is a picture of what we've just been describing, or a photograph. Then to the granary to see the fire glowing in the stove and blankets and sleeping bags airing round it. They felt dry and warm, said Anne as she filled the kettle and set it on the top of the stove. Bread, butter, knives, forks, plates, cups, all there in a box. A cup of tea, hastily swallowed. I must not be late at the station. My good friend John Haygate had met them at Paddington, taking them to his home and giving them coffee and milk and sandwiches and a rest for a while, before driving them to Liverpool Street Station and the train to Norfolk. Round to the cart shed again, push out the old open car. Will the engine start? The battery was a dud. I must renew it. Attach the trailer for luggage and off the narrow, winding coast road to the station. 10 minutes to wait. Time to put the hood up. At last, it was puffing around the curve. Would they be there? Supposing something had happened to stop them. There was one face, 2 faces, 4 faces, 5 faces, 6 faces. Hello? And who might this be? A sailor in a hat and suit and carrying a spade and bucket? The baby. Ah, but can he talk? What is he saying? Bossy Gibber? Oh, Blossom and Gilbert, the horses. Yes, no, they're fine. Hello, Robbie, you've grown too. But where are those thick yellow curls? And Margaret, dear, how you've grown up. No, I'm afraid you can't have your pony yet. But I've got two lovely little carts. One a governess car, or jingle, as we call them in Devon long ago, and the other a bit larger. Hello, John. Yes, Windles, you shall do some ploughing, rather. How are you doing, Letitia? I've got some hens. They actually lay eggs. I'll get the luggage. The trailer's on the car. Here we are. I'm afraid the cottages won't be ready quite yet, my dear, but the granary's warm now that I've altered the stove and the winds drop. I've got the hood up for the small children. Now we're off. Now that we're off, we'll soon be there. It's only 4 miles. Hark! What's that? That strange, jangling, honking, cronking noise. Hundreds of noises all together up in the sky. Oh, listen, children. The wild geese coming in from the sea. This is the coast of the wild geese. Forgotten were the unhappy hours, the mental struggle against decay and dirt, against spiritual and material decadence. The wild geese were the genius of the place, bringing life to it at last. Devon was alive for me because of the salmon, the mystic ocean wanderer. Now life was flowing through me once more, for the wild geese were flying in. For the wild geese were flying in from the sea. Beauty was coming again. Flocks of the birds were flying inland at intervals all night. We heard them in the granary as we sat at the long oak table eating roast pheasant which Mrs. Hammett had cooked for us. How the children loved the granary. They ran up and down the stairs. They explored all the dark nooks and caves among the stacked furniture. They thought it ever so clever and ever so nice and nicer than their ordinary house. And while they were undressing overhead, their bare feet were heard running on the boards, and I knew I was right to have brought them here to the farm. They believed in me and all I had promised for the new life to be. I must not fail them. They were England, the new England. This was only the beginning. When they were all asleep upstairs, I went outside into the frosty night and saw the stars again, as though for the very first time. Oldie Baron, the glaring eye of the bull, Sirius, the dog star, baying in the green fire across the southern horizon, behind Orion, the hunter, and I saw the great bear and the gem-like shimmer of Pleiades, or whatever his name is. Starlight and sunlight had fallen for 1,000 centuries in this valley. The earth endured forever, and the men shall serve the earth of England, and the earth shall serve men of our race, the English, forever. Yeah, don't count your chickens there, mate. In the starlight I climbed the hill and looked up into the sky, and felt the earth bearing me up, the strong earth, dear earth, and, as other men had before me, but wordlessly, I prayed. And there we come to the end of that chapter, on chapter 26. Let's have a look and see what's going on here. Happy birthday. Does the Queen Elizabeth Hospital still exist in Brum? You're not being foolish at all, Linda. Why is Linda being foolish? Yes, nice ploughing. Nice straight furrow for the beginner. Good Lord, I spent a month there when I was 5 in 1967. Says Morton. I bet there were a lot of birds following the plough back then, not like today with all the pesticides. It's funny you should say that, because I've just been reading this book, The Theft of the Countryside, which says exactly what you just said. Who said that anyway? Was that Adrian? I think it was. Linda Kane says, killing salmon to the possibility of killing wild geese. Yeah, that's it. Seems to... killing it must have been, it was an old thing, wasn't it? The swines. Harry Ferguson, says Edward Moulding, is invention of the automatic control linkage system described in the book becomes the worldwide standard used by almost all tractors. I need to watch the rerun later. Keep getting interrupted this afternoon. Oh, sorry about that. I will do my best not to interrupt you. Nothing nicer than cold tea. I was interrupted by an email just now. Christmas Eve, 1937. This is chapter 6, A Vision of Christmas. The frost glitters in the starlit grasses. The horse pond is frozen. Wild geese fly overhead. When I open the granary door, I see bare trees dark against the sky. It is Christmas again, and I have a rendezvous in ancient moonlight with you and you and you, unknown comrades of that first Christmas, when, for myself and my friends, a miracle broke into the near hopelessness of our youthful lives. The human facts of that marvellous and introspective, poignantly beautiful time still live for many of my generation, with the hope that its knowledge, feeling, may increase, that eventually all men in Europe will be inspired by its truth. I have no idea what he's on about here. A long time ago, Christmas 1914, 23 years, nearly a quarter of a century, yet we still hope, those who were there, the living and the dead, that the vision of peace we lived during those few rare hours may be made real and everlasting. Geese are flying overhead as I write this, sitting in the granary of my Norfolk farm. Overhead, up the worm-eaten stairs, my children sleep in a heap of sacks and rugs. They are warm and snug, and they dream of Christmas. The cries of the wild geese bring sharply before me a bare and frozen wood of Flanders, charcoal braziers, bearded men in woolen balaclava, helmets, rifles piled, starlight, and the smoke of green wood fires. For weeks we had lived in the flooded trenches. The Germans were 80 yards away. Our trench was enfiladed, enfiladed, not sure how you pronounce it or what it means. Enfiladed. We lost many men, shot by snipers. Night after night since the tailing off of the Battle of Ypres, we had toiled on the parapets, filling sandbags with clay mud, squelched through the muddy lagoons of woodland tracks, carrying rations, duck boards, pumps, ammunition. We were volunteers, rushed out to help General French's shattered expeditionary force. A few weeks before, we'd been schoolboys, bank clerks, undergraduates, medical students. Now, our lives were ravaged. Some of us, the young ones who thought of their mothers, were near to despair. We were without hope and without horizon. At first, trench life had been interesting, even enjoyable. It was fun cooking our own bacon and making tea in the wood while shrapnel cracked overhead. Good sport stalking the wild geese in the marshes, satisfying to feel the soft hairs of our unshaven chins. The regulars were decent chaps, heroes of Mons. But the rains fell, and the trenches filled almost waist-high. And after a few days we could scarcely move our legs, and nor did we seem to need food. At night we dragged ourselves out of the ditches and moved about, uncaring of bullets aimed at random in the dark. At night we worked in carrying parties, pumping fatigues, at parapet building. At dawn we slid into the water again and set ourselves to endure the grey daylight. Even now, so long afterwards, when I hear the rain on the tiles overhead, the ghost of that time makes me draw the blankets closer round my neck. On the eve of Christmas, 1914, we were in the support line, about 200 yards inside Ploughing Wood, or some such name that I can't pronounce. It was freezing. Our overboots were stiff as boards. Our boots were too hard to move. But we rejoiced, for the mud was hard too. Also, happy thought we would be able to sleep that night inside a new blockhouse of oak boughs and sandbags called Piccadilly Hotel. No bed, but the cold earth. No blankets even, but sleep. Sleep. Then came a message from brigade headquarters. Brought, I think, by 2nd Lieutenant Bruce Barnesfather of Warwick's. Wiring parties were required in no man's land all night, and there would be a moon. We would have to work only 50 yards from the German machine guns in the White House opposite the eastern edge of the wood. 2 hours later we filed out of the dark trees into the naked moonlit terror of no man's land, holding shovels beside our faces in hope of protection against the unexpected mortar blast. The moon was high and white among the frozen cloudlets. We were visible. Someone slipped with the clank of a spade and rifle. We flung ourselves on our faces. We waited. The battlefield was as silent as the moon. For an hour we worked in silence, in a most mysterious and soundless way. What had happened? We began to talk naturally as we drove in stakes and pulled out concertinas of prepared wire. There was no rifle fire either up or down the line, from way up north beyond Ypres to the south beyond Armenteres and the French army. At midnight we were laughing as we worked. We heard singing from the German lines, carols, the tunes of which we knew. I noticed a very bright light on a tall pole raised in their lines. Down opposite the East Lancs trench in front of the convent, a Christmas tree with lighted candles was set on the parapet. The unreal moonlight life went on unhappily. Cries of, "Come over, Tommy, we won't fire at you." A dark figure approached me hesitatingly. A trap? I walked towards it with bumping heart. "Merry Christmas, English friend." We shook hands, tremulously. Then I saw the light on the pole was the morning star, the star in the east. It was Christmas morning. All Christmas Day, grey and khaki figures mingled and talked in no man's land. Picks and spades rang hard in the ground. It was strange to stare at the dead we had only glimpsed swiftly from the trenches. The shallowest graves were dug, filled, and set with crosses knocked together from lengths of ration box wood, marked with indelible pencil, for king and country, for Vaterland and Vrijheid, or something, fatherland and freedom. Freedom? How was this? We were fighting for freedom. Our cause was just. We were defending Belgium, the civilization. These fellows in grey were good fellows. They were, well, strangely, just men like ourselves. How can we win the war, English comrade? Our cause is just. We are ringed with enemies who would wish to crush us economically. We ask only for a place in the sun, and now we are defending our parents, our homes, our German soil. No, we cannot lose the war, for right is on our side. A most shaking, staggering thought that both sides thought they were fighting for the same cause. the war was a terrible mistake. People at home didn't know this. Then the idea came to the young and callow soldier that if only he could tell them all at home what was really happening, and if the German soldiers could tell their people the truth about us, well, the war would be over. But he hardly dared to think it, even to himself. The next day was quiet. And the next. Waving hands from the trenches by day, singing and reflected blaze of trench bonfires at night. It was a lovely time. On the third afternoon came a message from the Germans. At midnight our staff officers will visit, and we must fire our automatic pistolen. But we will fire high. Nevertheless, please keep cover. At 11 p.m., Berlin midnight, we saw the flashes going away into the air. 2 days later, an army order came from GHQ to the effect that men found fraternizing with the enemy would be court-martialed and, if found guilty, would suffer the death penalty. Not the death penalty. And again, in that place the very lights soared over no man's land, and the bullet cut showers of splinters from the trees and sometimes human flesh and bone. So hope sank into the mud again, but did not die despite withering anew as each poor human fell in a machine-gun mort blast and colossal reverberating rendering of shells of those 4 years, those years of truth which seem to be incommunicable. Sometimes, as one listens to what people say here in England that a generation died for, it seems almost like the pre-war again, and my heart is heavy with all the weight of the darkness, the prejudice of men's minds. The wild geese cry as they pass high under the moon, flying for the clover fields, and my little children stir in their sleep. The morning star of hope is rising once again. Well, that was a bit powerful, wasn't it? That was chapter 26. I'm just going to have a pause there for a moment whilst oh my God, this is a very long chapter. It might be a suitable time to pause, because that's a big old chapter. Let's have a look. A volley of gunfire directed along the line from end to end. Says, Linda Kane says, got some Prosecco, but she's not willing to share, I expect. Jehovah's Witnesses will run next week. What are you on about? I notice how he's going back to World War I. The prose is flowing more smoothly. That's true, yes. I mean, I think he wrote this in bits and fits and starts, because he talks as though this is, he's writing from the future, looking back at the past, and yet some bits I think he must have written at the time, like that bit, because he mentions I'm sitting here writing, and I think from the way this book has been put together, there is an element of cobbling it together is how I look at that. Ideology is usually a cover for the real intent, in my opinion, says Michael Angel. Beautifully read, Richard, that last bit. Thank you very much. Very kind. We ask only for a place on the sunbed. Yes. Yes, you see, it's so difficult because you don't know whether it's inappropriate to use a somewhat mock German accent in order to differentiate the German characters from the English characters. But for me, that's my upbringing, and I'm not trying to mock them, even though the accent is a mock accent. It's not mocking. It's a pseudo accent because I can't be a German and could never put the nuances in. That was a bit of a tour de force. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think I'm going to leave it there because the next one is quite a a big bit. But we get back to time. So yeah, but this is what is interesting. I think this is interesting that a lot of the writers have referred that we've been reading as we know, J.B. Priestley and H.L.V. what's his name, Morton, H.V. Morton, and who was the other one, Rolt. They've all made references because they're writing in the 30s, and as he says, it's only 13 odd years ago or something, the First World War. This is all very fresh in their mind. And some of them served in the trenches in different things, in different positions. And so you're not going to forget that, are you? It's going to be in your psyche. It's an experience you probably won't want to remember, but that triggers in your memory. And I suppose on a smaller degree to some of the younger members of society will remember this episode where they were locked in and couldn't go out. I don't feel I've been locked in because I've managed to go out and it hasn't actually affected me terribly much at all because it's been business as usual for me. But for some people, I mean, certainly Mr. Morton Lewis there, locked in Spain, that's very unusual. But he does go back, doesn't he? And he refers back to that earlier time. And they all do, and it's and this talk about the New England that he wants, and that very patriotic feeling that he's trying to get people out of the depression, because that's what we must remember, that there was this in the 30s, this huge depression, and people weren't really believing in England, and people were unemployed, and who knows, we may well be heading straight for something similar now with the aftermath of what's happened with this COVID problem, which may turn out, as I suspect, a huge overreaction and a great shooting in the foot, but a difficult decision for a government to take, whichever government was in, to have gone against what the rest of the world and the outrage of the media was saying, if it transpires very clearly to everybody that this was not as bad as it was made out to be. As I said, I suspect that is the case. But so we may end up in a big depression, but you know they were trying to get out of depression, and he obviously took to farming, and he saw it as a noble thing. You can clearly see that from his writing, and even though he was relatively successful writer, he felt he needed to do something with his hands and do something. And I think there's a craving, isn't there, in man. I use man, you know, peoples, in man's desire to. There's a craving to fulfill a certain need, a basic need, isn't there? Well, not in everybody, clearly, but to go back to the earth, to go back to the mud and muck, and to do that primeval thing of growing something. And you know, people are in lockdown, and what did they do? They went to their allotments, or they went to the gardens, and they wanted to grow things. And that must be a primeval thing that good, hardy people, not elites who are finding ways of just increasing their wealth for the sake of it and becoming slicker and more detached from the world, but good, hardy folk who can and have a sense of place and a sense of nature and a sense of, you know, who is it? There's somebody who talks about the theirs and the not theirs, I think it is. It's people who have a sense of place and are grounded either in a town or in their country. And there's those that belong, and those that can be any. There's the what is it? It's the theirs or the here's and the or the anywhere. And there's those that are quite happy to be anywhere. as long as they've got a laptop and the internet connection, and they can run their business or their life. They have photos in the cloud. They don't need them printed. They don't need bricks and mortar in one place. They can just frit around and be anywhere. There's those people, and then there's the people who want to have a home and are more wholesome and hardy, and they want to get their fingers dirty, and they belong to a place and they care for that place. I forget what they call them, and I guess it comes from the the beginnings of the hunter-gatherers and the Neolithics, where some wanted to settle down and farm, and can see the advantage of not chasing after animals, and perhaps we still have those two types of people, and I would guess that the heres and the everywheres, that the heres are probably the Brexiteers, and the everywheres are those that wanted to remain in the EU. I'm guessing. Anyway, we digest a hell of a lot there. As I reflect on that. Wars on that scale in the last generation, says Graham Craig. Yes, absolutely. I mean, just a nightmare. We still refer to the wars even after 100 years, says Turbo Streams. Yes, that's very true. And we still remember them and what they meant. And that's true, and we ought to. It should reverberate down the generations, because it was so colossally bad. With you on the overreaction part, says Morton. Yes, from what you said to me when we talked to you on the Vogue show that day, Simon, isn't it? I could, can't imagine being locked in an apartment, although you may not have actually physically locked the door, but having to remain in that apartment for so long. I think there will be lawsuits for the next 20 years. Yes. You should watch a documentary called Nazis: A Warning from History, Michael Angel says. I'll have to look that one up. I'm here, there and everywhere. I'm still a patriot Brit. Yeah. I get that. Very much from your comments. You can tell, you've left Birmingham and that area, but, your heart is still there, even though you're in Spain. Put down roots. I'm wholesome and hardy. Good man. Well, on that note, anyway, so no more reading until Monday. Sorry about that, but we'll get back onto 27. I buy stock and seed. I'm enjoying this because there's part of me that would love to be a farmer. The more I read about the countryside, the more I'm walking around and looking at it and seeing how some of the farmers are doing it, and the more I would love to have not a huge farm, a little bit of land. Oh, to have a little bit of land, and to be able to farm it in the way you want, in a way that's good for the countryside, makes enough profit to live on, but not being greedy, provides local people with some local produce if they want it at a reasonable rate. You're not fleecing them, but at the same time, you're not obviously doing it at a loss. It's going to be unlikely, though, on my wages, but it would be a remarkable thing. I think that's in people. Anyway, right. Ed Ovet thought so, he says. I'm not quite sure on what he's thinking of, but nice to see you there anyway. You need an allotment. Yeah, an allotment wouldn't do it. I need a small holding. That's what I want. I want a small holding. I don't want... Watching Mr. Suggett's situation is... and there we are, there's Sean there. It's not the same. It's not the same. I've been on his allotment numbers of times. and there's all the other people doing their thing, and there's rules and regulations of what you can't have a barbecue, and you can't do this and you can't do that. Many people dream of that. Many people looking for small farms to become self-sufficient. Yeah, well, I think there is that sense of that's what life is about, isn't it? There's that sense. For me, I think this is why I've got my Essie, and I burn wood, and I don't have central heating, and I have no inclination to have central. And now I've got rid of my television. And there is, you know, as you get older, perhaps you start to think, what is it I want from life? What do I want? What does this all mean? I've had children, and they've grown up. I've worked to pay the mortgage, and none of that satisfied me now. I don't want to retire and just sit and watch the box all day long or do nothing. There is something. I've not, you know, the thing I do with my hands is editing. It's creative, but it's on a computer. It used to be on film and stuff, but that's almost not enough. I need to communicate. That's one of my things. I need to learn and learn. I feel I know nothing, absolutely nothing. The more I read, the more I realize how little I know. And then that's a strange sort of dichotomy, isn't it? Because you know, you could read to the end of your life like so many of these people who become eminent historians or whatever, and then they die, and all that knowledge is just decays with them. They might write it into books to be able to pass it on, but you know, you learn and learn until the last breath, and then it's just gone. That's a whole philosophy. Anyway, Christian Soldier, 1965. Thanks for sharing, Richard. My pleasure. Get a camper van and go on tour. That YouTube would love that. Yes. I mean, I do need to get a camper van, and but it's getting one that will, you know, on the one hand, a little camper. Oh, this is another bloody debate here, isn't it? I've seen some bigger camper van, you know, the bigger ones. I've nowhere to keep it. And I couldn't afford 2 cars, and you couldn't use that for nipping out and about. But it's a better size, you know, it's like with the people on the canal boats. It's a better size for actually going for proper time and actually getting a feel for a place rather than just flitting about. I don't know. I'm feeling I'm not, even with all the videos and stuff that I do, I'm not doing myself justice. You know, I can churn out rubbish, but I'm feeling I'm not being truthful. And that's I am being truthful, but I feel there's more. there's more. I'm not sort of digging enough below the surface, if you know. And to me, an allotment, taking that is it's not sufficient. You know, it's like, yeah, you're only playing at it, and I don't mean that in any disrespect to those people who have allotments like Sean. I don't mean that. It's like allotment is a sort of a one step to having a farmstead or a small holding, or a small holding is one step down the line to a farm. I wouldn't want a farm, but a small holding. But that, you know, you'd probably take all your life, and I probably would regret it. That's the trouble. And you're probably absolutely right. Get an allotment is probably the answer. And yet in my mind, for some reason, the comprehension is, well, it's a halfway house. And I am an all or nothing person. That's why I do a video every day. It's either do it, I can't do one a week. I've got to throw myself into something and do it, or don't do it. And that's my weird personality. Anyway, enough of that. Any news on the house, says Linda? Yeah, nothing. No news. We were told about 3 weeks, nearly 4 weeks ago, nearly a month ago, that once they, you know, when the house people were going back to work, how long ago was that? When the estate agents could go back to work, and we were told, oh yes, it's all going to move very quickly. And of course, all I'm hearing now is house prices are going down. and I'm just waiting, just treading water, trying to keep the head above my shoulders, desperate to take the Bald Explorer to do something, but rather than just whiz out over there, do a quick walk, come back, edit it, go and do a quick walk over there, desperate to have something meaningful to say and to move forward. I feel I'm treading water at the moment. You can video my camper, Richard, if you want. Don't know what that means, really. I'm at that stage, searching for something, looking for nothing. Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, my allotment would be great if I didn't have neighbours in a committee. Yeah, they spoil it. Richard, you could use my allotment patch. I don't achieve anything, but you would. Well, Julia, I want to get rid of that bloody trampoline of yours. I want to get rid of that trampoline which is sitting there, and either put your shed in there so that you can have a den, or that we blitz the garden and actually grow something useful. Audrey says, advertise for a beautiful lady, must have a tractor. Yes, well, that would be the answer, wouldn't it? Is to that there's the old adage, isn't there? The old thing is marry into money, which is always good. And then they want you not because you're rich, but they want you because you are not handsome or any of that nonsense, but you're a doer. And I think that's something that attracts people, possibly, the what do you call them, the widowers, the rich widowers, or they, what's the other thing? I've lost my train of thought now, but yeah, that's one way of doing it. What's the theme for tonight? Oh, good question. Yeah, what is the theme for tonight? It's 5 o'clock. I must go and light the Essie and I'm making some more bread. Oh, by the way, on the bread front, I haven't got it here. I bought myself a 16-kilogram bag of flour, dirty great big bag of flour, and went to the supermarket to buy some more yeast because I've run out of yeast. Guess what? So have they. Bastards. So I then went to online, thought, well, I'd probably need a big bag of yeast, but it all seemed very expensive. I don't know if there's a yeast shortage at the moment. Seeley Chase, pray about it. Also knowing what you want is vital. Yes, well, I know. Look at me. I don't know why I'm not moaning about it. Look at me. I'm doing what I want. I'm making videos. I've spent 50-something years to get to the point where I don't have to do the corporate work. I don't have to do a full-time job. I don't have to get up in the morning if I don't want to. But I do, because I'm up at 6 every day, and I work bloody hard because I love it. And I will work hard because I love it. I love what I do, and I love talking to you, and I love you talking back to me, and I love reading to you, and I want to get better at it, and I love doing the walks and putting them out there, and I'm amazed that anybody is interested in the slightest in what I do. It's absolutely, I'm amazed, that people even send a pound in when they do. It's staggering, and it's rewarding, and it's very, what's the word? I'm honoured. I am, there's a word. Humbling. It's humbling that people find that the slightest thing I do interesting, particularly having had the background with my mother telling me that I would amount to absolutely nothing. And that's, it's just... So I'm not moaning at all. It's just, I still feel I have so much to do. That's what I feel. There's so much to give, and it's trying to focus it. It's trying to focus it in. Anyway, mustn't go on now because things to do. So yeah, fulfilling. It is extremely fulfilling. But it's at its root. It's so humbling that anybody would want to watch anything that I do. That's the goddamn truth. It's I'm so thankful. Really, I'm incredibly thankful. Right, I must go because I'm getting all emotional. So thank you very much. We'll see. I don't know what the theme is. I'm sorry. I'll try and I'll talk to the lovely Julia a bit later, and we'll try and cobble up a theme. Oh, and hopefully the lovely Julia will be here tonight. Here, so I've got to rejig the studio. No, yes, I've got to rejig the studio and get that all together, as well as everything else. All right, take care. Thanks for watching. Really interesting conversation at the end there, and stimulating book. Till next time, take care. See you on Monday for the reading and the Vobe Show tonight on the Vobe Show channel. All the best, and bye-bye for now. Bye-bye.